Hi everyone, spring is here and we're thinking about what to plant in the garden. I want to talk to you today about what you should plant and what you shouldn't plant in your yard in spring versus fall. I'm Matt, welcome back to Touchgrass Gardening, where we talk about rare, exotic, and fun trees growing in a harsh environment. So let's talk about what to plant. So before I dive into the specific trees that do better to plant in the spring versus the fall, I want to talk to you about my philosophy of planting. So there are just certain trees that when they're saplings or small or new to a new environment, they just will die in their first summer or their first frost, depending on if they're cold or heat sensitive. So the first research and way of thinking about these type of trees is to know what they're most sensitive to, what they're most likely to die from. And that's what we're going to talk about next, is which trees are more sensitive to what, and then why you should plant them at a certain time, like spring right now. So let's talk about the trees that are ideal to plant in the spring. And you really want to be thinking about the trees that can take a full summer sun, a ton of heat, but might be more sensitive to the winter. A great example of that is a guava, a tropical guava, like this Mexican cream guava. And I planted this last spring, so it was very small last spring. This one grows fast. It can take pretty much full sun as long as you give it enough water. But in the winter, it always dies back a little bit. You can see that the top leaves really got burned by the frost that we had a couple weeks ago. But if this was just a tiny little plant, it could have killed it. And that's why I planted it in the spring, because it gave it time to grow, it gave it time to establish its roots, so that when it does get damaged, it's fine and it can regrow itself instead of just dying. Because a lot of these type of plants, if you plant them in the fall and they get a big frost, they will die just because they're so shocked by it that they will just give up on living. And I've had multiple plants do that. And so if you want to think about what type of plants can really take our sun, but might be a little bit more sensitive to the winter, guava is a great example of that. And you should just look up online, what is the cold tolerance of this plant? And then also think about, can it take full sun? So in my yard, some examples of things that I like to plant in the spring is like a citrus. It loves full sun. I also would think about something like an Indian jujube. You know, it is cold sensitive, but it just can take a blasting sun. So those are the type of plants that you really want to get established before its first winter. I also want to talk about what plants you should put in the ground in the fall. And there are those that just really hate Arizona's summer, but they do fine in our winter. And Loquat is one of those. This likes to have shade for its first summer or two, but then it can grow into more sun. You can see this plant here is looking beautiful. I planted it in the fall about 2.5 years ago, and it can take our full winter frost. It doesn't even matter. It was blooming during our frost and the flowers were unaffected, so we're still gonna get fruit. And there's a lot of trees like this actually that I like, a lot of trees that will stay evergreen but can take a frost. So for example, other ones like that are avocados. A lot of people want avocados in their yard, like this Zutano here. I also have my seedling avocados here. I would say you should not plant avocados in the spring. Even if the nursery is selling them and it's a discount, whatever, keep it in a pot, keep it in your house, keep it in the shade until the fall, because it's really, really hard to keep an avocado to survive through an Arizona summer, especially in its first year, unless you plant it in the fall and it gets a chance to establish its roots so that in the first summer it's able to suck up more water to be able to deal with our heat and sun. And it still wants a bit of shade for the first few summers. So avocado is another one where you're gonna be thinking about, I do not want to plant this in the spring no matter how much I want this in my yard. Now I want to talk about stone fruit. So your peaches, your plums, blueberries, even a Chinese jujube. Most deciduous fruit trees. Now, most people say you can plant them in the spring or the fall. I have a strong opinion on this in that they should be planted in the fall for multiple reasons. The first is you can let them establish their roots over the fall, over the winter, and then in the summer, they're not going to be completely blasted and be in shock because the Arizona hot sun is just so overwhelming for most trees. The other reason is if you buy a stone fruit tree in the fall and plant it in the fall, normally it still has its leaves. And so it's active. Its roots are still ready to grow. But if you buy a stone fruit tree that is either bare root, so they cut off a bunch of roots and they mailed it to you, or it's just without leaves, it's not active, it's less likely to start growing its roots over the winter, and it's possible that it's not going to wake up in the spring. I would say about 10 to 20% of the stone fruit that I've bought online or from nurseries, when they're deciduous, like this, like a Chinese jujube, they just do not wake up. And then they never wake up. And then you just have to pull it out and throw it away or return it. And that's really frustrating. But I've never had that happen with a stone fruit, a deciduous tree that I planted in the fall that had leaves when I planted it. So that's my strong opinion on stone fruit. Either can work, but I really recommend you to plant stone fruit in the fall. What you definitely want to plant in the spring are your tropical trees. So things like your mangoes or your jackfruits, other things that are very sensitive to the winter. And I have these in a greenhouse, but sometimes there's things that happen where there's a strong wind or it rains and it just gets a little bit cooler than I had expected. And if you let it have an extra year in ground of building those roots and the microclimate of trees around it, it's just going to be able to survive those sort of freak winter events much easier. So if you're thinking about these really hypertropicals, even if you're going to build a greenhouse like this, you really should get them in the ground after the first freeze of the year. So for me, it's kind of mid to late February, usually, that we have our last freeze. And that's when I would add trees to this greenhouse environment and really make sure that there's not going to be another freeze before I take all of this off. But most of these are fine in our full sun, whether it's mango or jackfruit. Some things I might have to shade a little bit in the sun the first year. But for the most part, what I'm really worried about tropicals is them dying in the winter. So even in an environment like mine where you have a harsh winter and a harsh summer, there are certain trees that it really doesn't matter when you plant them. It's just best to get them in ground as soon as possible. One of those is what's behind me, the silk floss. This is one of my favorite trees. It always gets a little bit of frost damage in the winter, but that's actually part of its cycle. It loses all of its leaves and then it puts on blooms. So it actually likes the cold a little bit, as long as it's not getting below like 25 degrees Fahrenheit. And it doesn't really care. It is a little bit sensitive to the sun in the full summer heat as well. So, you're kind of thinking about both of them, but it really doesn't matter. There's gonna be a little damage from both because this tree doesn't want to be here. It's from a jungle in South America, but I brought it to a desert in Arizona. So it's never gonna be perfect, and it's so big, so you can't protect it from the winter anyway. Another tree that's actually pretty easy in both seasons is mulberry. So next to me I have a white mulberry, and you can plant this in either the spring or the fall. It doesn't matter. Again, I would say get it in the ground as soon as you can so you can enjoy the fruit. Now, you might be more likely to get fruit on the first year when you put it in the ground if you plant it in the fall, because then it has a chance to establish roots. But as far as ensuring that it lives, which is what we've been talking about today, it doesn't matter. If you can kill a mulberry, that's a feat in itself. This tree will not die no matter what you do to it. So just get it in the ground as soon as possible. There's a lot of trees like that. Actually, most trees, you should do that. what I've talked about today is really those that are difficult trees, trees that shouldn't be in an environment that they're in, but there are a lot of trees, easy ones like this, like a mulberry, just put it in the ground. So I hope you found this video helpful. It's sort of a nuanced niche topic that not everyone may find value from, but if you're a serious gardener, I really think whether you plant in the spring or the fall can have huge impact on the outcomes of your trees. So if you found this video useful, please like it and then share it with a friend. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd really love you to do that. Again, here we talk about rare, exotic, and fun trees growing in a really harsh environment. So if you like any of that, or you live in a harsh environment, or you just like seeing these cool trees, please let me know and come back again next time.